The cardboard box groaned under the strain. I cut the tape with my utility knife, the blade scrape echoing in the empty apartment. Inside, nestled in yellowed newspaper, was the mirror. It was heavier than it looked in the thrift store, the wooden frame dark and scarred with age. I carried it to the bathroom. The room was small, with a single, bare bulb that cast a sickly yellow light over the peeling linoleum and the rust-stained sink. I found a stud in the drywall. The screw bit in with a satisfying chew. I lifted the mirror, my arms straining, and settled it onto the hook. It hung straight. I stepped back, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. My reflection looked back. A stranger, thinner than I remembered, with lines around the eyes I didn't recognize. The price of 5 years. The day had been long. Another string of closed doors and polite rejections. We'll keep your application on file. The lie tasted like ash. I needed this to work. A new city, a new name on a lease. A blank slate. This cheap apartment, this second-hand mirror. They were the first bricks in a new life. I squeezed toothpaste onto the brush. The bristles were stiff. I worked them against my teeth, the minty foam filling my mouth. My eyes were on my reflection. My hand moved. The reflection's hand moved. As it should. I spat into the sink, a white splatter against the brown rust. I leaned on the basin, water from the tap washing the foam away. When I looked up, something was different. The mouth in the mirror. It was pulled to one side. A twitch. Not my twitch. A smirk. It was a cold, knowing expression, one I hadn't seen on my own face in years. It was him, the man from before. I straightened up, my heart giving a single, hard thump against my ribs. I stared. Nothing. Just my own tired face, mouth set in a flat line. Eyes wide. The yellow light buzzed. I must have been more tired than I thought. My eyes were playing tricks on me. ITSKED, a dry sound in my throat, turned off the light, and went to bed. The morning light was gray, filtered through the grimy window of the small living area. The coffee maker sputtered, a welcome sound. I pulled my wallet and keys from yesterday's jeans and placed them on the small table by the door. Wallet on the right, keys on the left. Always. A small stupid habit that made me feel like I had some order in the chaos. I poured the black coffee into a chipped mug and took a sip. It was bitter, but it was hot. I drank the coffee standing by the window, watching the city wake up below. Trucks rumbled past. People walked with their heads down. The world didn't care about my new beginning. When the mug was empty, I rinsed it in the kitchen sink and went to the door. I reached for my keys. My hand stopped. They weren't there. They were on the other side of the wallet. On the right. My wallet was on the left. I stood completely still. I looked from the keys to the wallet, then back again. No, that wasn't right. I put the keys on the left. I always put the keys on the left. I was sure of it. 100%. A knot of irritation tightened in my stomach. It wasn't fear. It was anger. At myself. For being so stressed out, so scattered, that I couldn't even remember something so simple. My memory was getting shot. I snatched the keys and turned toward the bathroom. I flicked on the light. I stepped in front of the mirror and just looked. The face was mine. The expression was tense. I narrowed my eyes, searching the reflection for any sign, any flicker of movement that wasn't my own. The man in the glass just stared back, his eyes challenging mine. There was an intensity there, a stillness that felt unnatural. It was a perfect copy, and that was what made it feel wrong. I needed air. The walls were feeling too close. I checked the lock on the apartment door, turning the deadbolt until it clicked shut with a solid, reassuring sound. I walked down the 3 flights of stairs, the concrete cool under my thin-soled shoes. The air in the lobby was stale, smelling of old cigarettes and bleach. I pushed through the heavy front door and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city noise hit me, a wave of car horns and distant sirens. I started walking, no destination in mind. Block after block, I just walked. I tried to empty my head, to focus on the feeling of the pavement under my feet. After maybe 20 minutes, I stopped at a corner, waiting for the light to change. I reached into my pocket for my phone. It wasn't there. Shit! The word was a puff of white in the cool air. I'd left it on the kitchen counter. I turned around, a fresh wave of annoyance washing over me. I walked back, my pace quicker this time. I climbed the stairs, my legs burning with the effort. I pulled out my keys, found the one for my apartment, and slid it into the lock. It turned without resistance. The deadbolt wasn't engaged. The door was unlocked. My hand froze on the knob. The blood drained from my face. I listened. Nothing. No sounds from inside. I pulled the key out slowly. The click of the tumblers was loud in the quiet hallway. I thought about the click I had heard when I left. The definite, heavy sound of the bolt sliding into place. Had I imagined it? Pass. I pushed the door open. A crack at first, then wider. The living area was exactly as I had left it. The coffee mug was still in the sink. The cushions on the second-hand couch were undisturbed. No one was here. It didn't look like anyone had been here. A burglar would have tossed the place. I stepped inside, letting the door close softly a few inches behind me. I didn't latch it. I crept through the small apartment, my feet silent on the floorboards. Kitchen. Empty. Bedroom closet. Empty. Under the bed. Empty. Then I saw the bathroom door was ajar. A sliver of yellow light cut across the floor. I hadn't left it on. A dampness hung in the air, a warmth that hadn't been there before. I approached the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pushed it open. The room smelled of hot water and steam. The mirror was fogged over. A gray, opaque surface. And on that surface, someone had drawn letters with their finger. The condensation was darker where the lines were drawn, the words clear and stark against the haze. Welcome home. Panic hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. There was someone in my apartment. Right now. I turned and ran to the corner of the living room where my old baseball bat was propped against the wall. It was a piece of junk I used to wedge the window open. My hands were slick with sweat as I grabbed it. The worn tape on the handle felt rough against my skin. I flattened myself against the wall next to the bathroom doorway. The bat held high. My whole body was shaking. I could hear something. A sound from inside the bathroom. A quiet, rhythmic drip. Drip, drip, drip. It was the only sound in the world. Who is it? My voice was thin. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder. Who's in there? Silence. Only the steady drip of water. I couldn't just stand here. I couldn't hide in my own home. My jaw was clenched so tight my teeth ached. I took a deep breath, held it, and launched myself into the doorway. I burst into the bathroom, bat raised, ready to swing. The room was empty. The shower curtain was pulled back. The tub was wet. The faucet of the shower head was dripping slowly onto the porcelain below. The steam was already starting to fade from the air. I looked at the mirror. The surface was clearing. The words were gone, vanished as the condensation evaporated. There was nothing but the faint, ghostly streaks left behind. I was alone. I let out a ragged breath that turned into a shudder. The bat felt impossibly heavy. I lowered it, leaning against the doorframe for support. My legs felt like water. I felt like an idiot. A complete, paranoid fool. I must have forgotten to lock the door. The steam, the writing, my mind. It had to be my mind playing tricks. Stress. Lack of sleep. I stumbled over to the shower and tightened the faucet handle until the dripping stopped. The sudden absence of the sound made my ears ring. I stood there for a long moment, just breathing. In. Out. In. Out. The fear was ebbing away, leaving a hollow exhaustion in its place. I turned from the tub, and my eyes met my reflection in the now clear mirror. He was looking right at me. I was gasping for air, my chest heaving, sweat plastering my shirt to my skin. The man in the mirror was not. His chest was still. His face was calm, relaxed. His breathing was even. As I watched my own ragged breath hitching in my throat, the man in the mirror slowly raised his right hand. The movement was fluid, unhurried. He held it up, palm open, and gave a small, simple wave. It wasn't menacing. It was a greeting. A quiet, familiar gesture. Friendly, almost. And in that moment, in the buzzing silence of my empty bathroom, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. I slammed the bathroom door. The cheap wood shuddered in its frame. The sound was a flat crack in the air, followed by the jingle of the loose doorknob. I leaned my back against it, my shoulders heaving. My breath was loud in my ears. A wet, ragged sound. The doorknob was cold against my spine, a small, hard point of contact with reality. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor of the hallway, my knees pulled up to my chest. I stared at the opposite wall, at the faint water stains on the cheap drywall. My heart hammered a single, painful beat against my sternum, over and over. A machine out of control. I didn't see him wave. I saw a reflection in a mirror wave. It was an image on a piece of glass. A trick of the light. A symptom of a mind worn thin by stress and lack of sleep. I repeated the words to myself, a silent chant. It didn't help. The next few days were a study in avoidance. I used the kitchen sink to brush my teeth, spitting into the metal basin. I washed my face with cold water from the tap, catching my reflection only in the dull chrome of the faucet, a distorted, fisheye version of myself. I never turned on the bathroom light. The door remained closed. I could feel the mirror in there, waiting. An unblinking eye in the dark. I focused on the job hunt. I filled out applications online until my eyes burned. I walked the city, handing resumes to anyone who would take one. The rejections were a familiar weight. I came home each evening to the same four walls, the same silence. One night, I gave up. I bought a frozen pizza and a six-pack of cheap beer. I needed noise. I needed distraction. I turned on the small television I'd bought at a pawn shop. It was an old boxy thing with a temperamental picture. I found an action movie. Explosions. Gunfire. Screaming. It was perfect. I sat on the lumpy couch, the beer can cold in my hand, and let the noise wash over me. A car chase careened through a crowded city street. Metal shrieked. Glass shattered. I took a long drink of beer, the taste metallic and bitter. The movie cut to a night scene. The hero was sneaking into a warehouse. The screen was dark, mostly shadows and silhouettes. Then, for a second, the power in the building I was in must have dipped. The television screen went completely black. The sound cut out. The sudden, total silence was like a punch to the ears. And in that brief, polished blackness, I saw the room reflected back at me. I saw the couch. I saw the faint outline of the window. And I saw myself. The face in the reflection wasn't watching the space where the movie had been. It was looking directly at me. Its lips were pulled back from its teeth in a wide, predatory grin. It was a smile of pure, vicious satisfaction, and smeared across the reflection's neck, from the ear down to the collarbone, was a wet crimson streak. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't a shadow. It was the plain and simple color of blood. The television exploded back to life. A gunshot roared from the speakers. The screen flooded with muzzle flash and light. The reflection was gone, replaced by the movie's hero kicking down a door. My whole body jerked, a spasm of raw nerve. Beer sloshed from the can onto my hand, cold and sticky. I stared at the screen, but I wasn't seeing the movie anymore. I was seeing the grin, the blood, the way its eyes had been fixed on mine. My hand was shaking. I put the can down on the floor. The sound of my own breathing filled the room again. The next morning, the unease was a physical thing, a cold knot in my gut. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't live like this, startled by my own shadow, afraid of a room in my own apartment. I had to know. I had to prove to myself that it was nothing. I took the heavy-duty flashlight from the kitchen drawer. I walked to the bathroom door. My hand hesitated on the knob. I took a breath and pushed it open. The room was dark and still. I flicked on the flashlight, the beam cutting a sharp, white circle in the gloom. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I didn't want to see the whole room at once. I pointed the beam at the floor, then slowly, deliberately, raised it. The sink. The faucet. The peeling paint. And then, the mirror. The flashlight beam slid across its surface. It was just a mirror. My own tense face appeared in the circle of light, the flashlight held up beside my cheek. I moved the beam over every inch of the frame, looking for a wire, a hidden camera, anything. The wood was old, scarred with nicks and scratches. Nothing. I moved the light across the glass itself, and that's when I saw it. It was in the bottom right-hand corner, a detail so small I had missed it completely. At first it looked like a bit of tarnish, a flaw in the silvering. But my light was bright. It wasn't on the surface. It was a stain. A dark, reddish-brown smudge, no bigger than my thumbprint. It was faint, the color of old rust, but the more I stared, the more it looked like something else. It looked like blood that had soaked into paper and dried there for a very long time. I could see it wasn't on the outside glass. It seemed to be floating inside, trapped between the reflective layer and the front pane. A permanent part of its construction. I leaned closer, my breath fogging a small patch of the glass. I pressed my thumbnail against the surface, right over the stain and scraped. The only sound was the dry skittering of my nail against hard, unyielding glass. The stain didn't move. It couldn't be cleaned. It was inside. It was part of it. The feeling wasn't a thought. It was a certainty that rose from some deep place in my gut. Something was wrong with this object. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The building was alive with sounds. The groan of pipes in the walls. The muffled thump of a television in the apartment below. The distant wail of a siren. Rising and falling. I turned onto my side. I closed my eyes. All I saw was the grinning face in the television screen. My phone, on the nightstand, suddenly vibrated against the wood. The sound was violent in the quiet room. My eyes snapped open. I reached for it, my hand clumsy in the dark. The screen lit up. Unknown number. My thumb hovered over the green icon. Every instinct told me to ignore it. To throw the phone against the wall, but the not knowing, the question mark hanging in the dark was worse. I swiped to answer and put the phone to my ear. Hello? Silence. Not a dead line. It was an open line. I could hear the faint, humming static of a connection. I could feel a presence on the other end, someone listening. Who is this? I asked, my voice tight. More silence. I was about to hang up, chalking it up to a wrong number, when a sound came through the speaker. It was a single, sharp intake of breath. Then, a scream. It wasn't just any scream. It was a high, panicked shriek of sheer terror and pain. A woman's voice, cut brutally short. It was a sound I had spent 5 years trying to forget. A sound I heard every night in my dreams. The last sound she ever made. A cold wave washed through me, so intense, it felt like my blood had turned to ice water. I ripped the phone from my ear and threw it. It hit the far wall with a sharp plastic crack and fell to the floor, the screen dark. I scrambled back on the bed, pressing myself against the headboard. My entire body was trembling. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. That was a memory, a nightmare. It wasn't a sound that could come through a telephone. I was alone in the room, but a scream was still echoing inside my head. The walls weren't just walls anymore. They were the box. I was sealed inside it. I don't know how long I sat there, shaking. An hour. 2. But a new feeling was growing under the fear. It was a hot, sharp anger. I was being toyed with. Pushed. I wasn't going to be a rat in a cage. I wasn't going to be afraid of a piece of furniture anymore. I got out of bed, my movements stiff. I went to the hall closet and pulled out the heavy canvas drop cloth I'd used when I painted the kitchen. It was heavy, dusty. This was going to end. I stormed toward the bathroom, the cloth clutched in my fist. I didn't hesitate at the door. I threw it open and lunged inside, flicking on the light switch as I went. The room was flooded with that same sickly yellow light. I squared my shoulders to the mirror, my heart pounding a war drum against my ribs. I saw my own reflection, wild-eyed and desperate. No more, I snarled at it, and I raised the canvas cloth, ready to throw it over the glass and blind it for good. As my arms swung up, as the cloth sailed into the air, the image in the mirror twisted. It was no longer my reflection. It was him. The man from 5 years ago. His hair was matted with sweat. His shirt was torn at the shoulder and dark with wet patches of blood. His eyes, my eyes, were wide, blazing with a terrifying ecstatic fire I had not seen since that night. His face was contorted, mouth stretched into a black, soundless howl of pure rage. He was not looking at me. He was looking through me. He raised his hand. My hand, not in a wave, but balled into a tight, white-knuckled fist, ready to strike. A scream tore from my own throat, a raw, animal sound of terror. My legs gave out. I fell backward, my head cracking hard against the base of the doorframe. The world swam. The canvas drop cloth fluttered down, landing in a heap on the floor. I lay there on the cold linoleum, a constellation of black spots dancing in my vision. The back of my head throbbed with a dull, heavy pain. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, my body shaking uncontrollably. I blinked, trying to clear my head. I looked at the mirror. It was normal. Just a mirror. My own face stared back, pale and slick with sweat, my mouth hanging open, my eyes wide with shock. Harmless. Just glass and silver. It was a hallucination. The stress. The phone call. I fell. I hit my head. It was all in my mind. The wave of relief was so powerful it made me dizzy. Then I looked down. On the white tile floor, stark against the clean surface, right where the edge of the canvas cloth had settled, were 3 drops of liquid. They were small. They were perfect circles. They were dark, deep red, and they were wet. The light from the bare bulb above glinted off their fresh, liquid surface. They hadn't been there before I fell. I just stared at them. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The sound of dripping from the shower faucet started again, a slow, steady rhythm in the dead quiet of the room. Drip, 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 like blood falling from a fresh wound. The 3 red drops on the tile were a verdict. I did not clean them up. I closed the bathroom door and left them there, a small, obscene trinity in the dark. Sleep did not come. Instead, I worked. I found a job posting on a crumpled flyer pinned to a telephone pole. A warehouse, night shift, $10 an hour, cash. No questions asked. It was perfect. The next evening, I was stacking boxes onto a pallet. The work was mindless, punishing. Lift, turn, stack. Lift, turn, stack. The air smelled of damp cardboard and diesel fumes from the loading dock. My muscles burned. Sweat ran down my temples and stung my eyes. The repetition was a kind of drug, a heavy, physical rhythm that pushed thought away. For a few hours, the only thing that existed was the weight of the next box. Across the vast, poorly lit space, another man was working a different aisle. I could only see his silhouette against the bare yellow bulb hanging high above. I paused to wipe my brow on the sleeve of my shirt. As I did, the silhouette raised an arm. A simple wave. I was tired, but the gesture felt like a small point of human connection in the cavernous building. I lifted my own hand and waved back. I turned back to my pallet, grabbing another box. When I straightened up, I glanced over again. The man's arm was still in the air. Then it dropped and lifted again. The exact same motion. A stiff, mechanical repetition. Like a clockwork doll with a stripped gear. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but he had already turned away, his shape vanishing behind a tall rack of shelving. I shook my head. The fatigue was making me see things. I focused on the box in my hands, its corrugated edges pressing into my palms. Just work. The shift ended as the sky outside was turning a bruised gray. My body ached with a satisfying, honest pain. I followed the signs to a small, grimy break room in the back. A folding table, a few mismatched plastic chairs, and a humming vending machine were the only furniture. I wanted something cold. I dug a crumpled dollar bill from my pocket and walked to the machine. The glass front was smudged with fingerprints, but it was reflective enough. I saw myself, a stranger, hollow-eyed and streaked with dirt, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. I ran a hand through it, trying to smooth it down, and I froze. My hand stopped mid-air. In the grimy glass, a figure was standing behind my reflection, just over my right shoulder. It was the man from the warehouse floor. His form was dark and indistinct, but I could make out the shape of his work shirt, the solid set of his shoulders. He was not moving. He was staring at the back of my head in the reflection. My blood ran cold, the kind of cold that starts deep in your bones and spreads outward. I did not feel a presence behind me. I did not hear a footstep, but my eyes were telling me he was there, right there. I spun around. The break room was empty. The door was closed. The only sound was the low, electric hum of the vending machine's compressor. I stared at the space where he should have been. There was nothing. Just a concrete wall and a scuff mark on the floor. My own breath was loud in the small room. It wasn't the fatigue, it wasn't my eyes playing tricks. This was different. This was real. That night the fear did not let me rest. It followed me home. Into the apartment, into my bed. I lay on my back, watching the faint shapes the streetlights painted on my ceiling. Exhaustion pulled at me, a heavy tide, and eventually I went under. I was in the room. That room. 5 years ago. The air was thick with the smell of perfume and spilled wine. But I was not me. I was floating near the ceiling, a silent observer looking down. I saw myself, the younger me, the one with the fire in his eyes, standing over her. I saw his hand, my hand, grip her arm. I saw his other hand rise and fall. I heard the sounds. The wet, solid impacts. The splintering of bone. I saw the rage on his face, a mask of pure ecstatic violence. But this time, it was worse. As I watched from above, I could feel it. The rage was not just something I was seeing, it was a current pouring into me. I felt the ugly, profound satisfaction with every blow. I felt the thrill that tightened his jaw and widened his eyes. It was a poison seeping into me, the helpless observer, and a part of me, a deep and hidden part, welcomed it. I woke up with a strangled gasp, my body rigid. The sheets were twisted around my legs, damp with sweat. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The dream's residue was still on me, a vile, sticky film. Moonlight cut a pale rectangle across the bare floor. I sat up, my body trembling, and that's when I saw it. On my right wrist, stark against my pale skin, was a mark. It was not a shadow. It was not a trick of the light. It was a bruise, a dark, ugly bloom of ruptured capillaries, purple and black against the thin skin. It was shaped perfectly, unmistakably, like the print of a thumb and 4 fingers, dug deep into the flesh. My breath hitched. It was the same wrist, the same place I had seen him grab her in the dream. I touched it with the fingers of my other hand. The skin was tender, a sharp, pulsing ache radiating from the bone. This was not a dream. This was not a memory. It had reached out of the nightmare, out of the past, and it had touched me. It had left its mark on my body. A new kind of terror took hold, sharp and immediate. It was no longer just watching me. It was no longer a reflection in a piece of glass or a phantom in a vending machine. It was inside me. Or it was trying to be. It was leaving its fingerprints on my flesh, claiming me piece by piece. The thought was a physical blow. I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing. I was not going to let this happen. I would not be a vessel. I would not let it win. It lived in the mirror. It came from the mirror. I had to end it. In the hall closet, behind a stack of old newspapers, was a sledgehammer left by the previous tenant. I pulled it out. The wooden handle was rough in my hands, the cast iron head impossibly heavy. It was a tool of pure, uncomplicated destruction. I hefted it onto my shoulder and walked toward the bathroom. Each step was deliberate. Each footfall on the worn linoleum was a declaration of war. I did not pause at the door. I threw it open and stepped inside, flicking the light switch. The weak bulb hummed, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. And there it was, waiting. I faced it, the sledgehammer held tight in my sweating hands. In the glass, he was already there. It was my face, my body, but the thing looking back was not me. It was the man from the nightmare. His eyes were blazing with that same terrible fire. His mouth curled into a sneer of contemptuous amusement. He saw the hammer in my hands. He saw the terror and rage in my eyes. "You're not taking me," I snarled, the words tearing from my throat. "You're not getting in." The reflection's sneer widened into a grin. He lifted his own sledgehammer, a perfect gleaming copy of the one in my hands. He saw my intent, and he welcomed it. Then, slowly, he gave a single definitive nod. "Do it," the gesture said. "Let's see what happens." A guttural roar ripped out of me, a sound of pure, primal force. I swung the sledgehammer with every ounce of strength I had. I put my back, my shoulders, my rage, my fear, everything into the arc of the swing. The heavy iron head flew through the air, aimed directly at the center of that grinning face. Clang! The sound was not the explosion of shattering glass I expected. It was a high, ringing, metallic shriek. A sound of protest. A sound of metal striking something harder, more fundamental than itself. My arms vibrated from the impact, a painful shock that ran up to my shoulders. I stumbled back, my ears ringing. I stared, panting. The mirror was untouched. Not a crack, not a scratch, not a single imperfection on its smooth, silvered surface. It reflected the dingy yellow room with perfect clarity. It reflected me, my mouth agape, my eyes wide with disbelief. I looked down at the sledgehammer in my hands. A hairline fracture snaked across the face of the cast-iron head. A dark, jagged line, like a bolt of black lightning frozen in the metal. As I watched, a tiny chip of iron detached itself from the crack, and fell to the tile floor with a faint tink. The sledgehammer was broken. The mirror was not. I stood there, the useless weight of the ruined tool in my hands, and stared at my own horrified face in the glass. The grin was gone from the reflection. It didn't need to smile anymore. It had already won. The sledgehammer lay on the tile, a useless, broken thing. I left it there. I closed the bathroom door on the mirror, on the man inside the mirror, and walked away. The ringing in my ears faded, replaced by the sound of my own ragged breathing. There was no victory. There was no escape. It had shown me a simple truth. It was more real, more solid, than the tool I had used to destroy it. It was stronger than iron. My mind was a blank slate of shock. I moved on autopilot. I dressed in the dark, pulling on a clean shirt, a pair of jeans. I needed to get out. The apartment felt like a tomb, the walls pressing in. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked. The cool night air was a slap to the face, but it did nothing to clear my head. The city hummed around me, indifferent. Headlights swept past, briefly illuminating my path before plunging me back into shadow. After a few blocks, I saw the steeple. It rose into the dark sky, a black silhouette against the gray, light-polluted clouds. A church. I hadn't been inside one in years. Not since before. Not since I had become the kind of person who didn't deserve to be in a place like that. But my feet, acting on their own will, turned toward it. A pull I didn't understand. A desperate animal instinct for sanctuary. A heavy oak door, worn smooth by a century of hands, groaned open under my push. The air inside was different. It smelled of old wood, candle wax, and a faint, sweet trace of incense. It was cool and vast. A few low-wattage lights cast long, distorted shadows down the central aisle. The rows of pews were empty. I was alone. I walked slowly down the aisle, my footsteps echoing softly in the huge space. I slid into one of the back pews. The wood was hard and unyielding against my back. I didn't know how to pray. The words wouldn't form. I just sat there, my hands clenched in my lap, and stared forward. My eyes were drawn to the figure at the front of the room, hanging on the wall above the altar. The crucifix. It was carved from a dark, rich wood, polished to a dull sheen by time. It was supposed to be a symbol of hope, of sacrifice, of forgiveness. I looked up at the face of the Christ figure. In the dim light, the polished wood caught the faint glow from a distant candelabra. It reflected a shape. A face. My face. For one frozen heartbeat, I saw myself looking back from the curved surface of the wood. My own tired, haggard features. But the eyes were wrong. They were not my eyes. They were black pits. Bottomless wells of pure, empty darkness, devoid of any light or life. Then the angle shifted, the reflection warped and vanished, and it was just polished wood again. I blinked. My throat felt tight. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again. Just wood. Just a trick of the light on a curved surface. It had to be. I stayed until my legs grew stiff. I didn't find whatever I was looking for. No peace came. There was only the wood, and the wax and the silence. As I was about to leave, a side door near the altar creaked open. A woman stepped out. She was old, her face a roadmap of deep wrinkles, her body hidden in the simple black and white habit of a nun. She moved with a quiet, shuffling grace. She saw me in the back pew, and her expression softened into a gentle smile. She walked toward me, her rosary beads clicking faintly with each step. "It is late to be seeking the Lord's house," she said. Her voice was thin and reedy, but warm. I couldn't find a response. I just nodded. "He is here for you, always, even when you feel he is not," she continued. She held out a small, leather-bound book. A Bible. "Take this, my son. His words provide more comfort than stone walls." My hand trembled slightly as I reached out to take it. Her fingers, dry and papery, brushed against mine. "Thank you," I managed to say. The words felt foreign in my mouth. "God is with you," she said, her smile unwavering. I looked into her eyes to offer another thank you. They were kind eyes. A pale, watery blue, clouded with age. And deep within them, in the tiny black pinpricks of her pupils, I saw it. I saw him. Not a vague shape this time. It was the man from the mirror, perfectly rendered in the microscopic reflection. He was inside her eyes, looking out at me. And he nodded. A single, slow, deliberate gesture. A confirmation. A promise. A cold shock, sharp as a needle, pierced through me. I jerked my hand back as if her touch had burned me. I took a stumbling step away from the pew. I have to go, I stammered, the words tripping over each other. The nun's smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. My son, are you all right? I didn't answer. I turned and fled. I didn't walk this time. I ran. My feet pounded on the stone floor. The sound of frantic indictment in the silent church. I threw my weight against the heavy oak door and burst out into the night. I ran without looking back. I ended up at a bus stop, my chest heaving, sucking in gulps of exhaust-tinged air. The streetlights seemed too bright. Every passing car felt like a threat. I felt watched, hunted. The feeling was a physical weight on my shoulders. A bus hissed to a stop in front of me, its hydraulic doors sighing open. I climbed on, paid my fare with fumbled coins, and collapsed into a seat by the window. The bus rumbled through the sleeping city. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, trying to calm the frantic drumming in my chest. Just breathe. It was a reflection. It was the fatigue. It was my mind breaking. I repeated the words, but they were hollow. They offered no comfort. We passed through the downtown core. The streets were lined with tall office buildings, their glass facades dark and reflective. As we rolled past one, a massive wall of black glass, I saw the bus's reflection slide across its surface. I saw the rows of faint yellow lights inside. I saw the silhouette of the other passengers. I looked for my own reflection, a pale shape in the window seat. But I wasn't there. My seat, in the reflection, was not empty. Someone was sitting there. It was him. The man from the nightmare. The man from the mirror. I could see his profile clearly, stark against the lit interior of the reflected bus. He was in my place. He was in my seat. And as I stared, horrified, from the real bus, the reflection of him turned his head. He looked out the window of his reflected world, directly at me. His lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. He wasn't trapped in the glass anymore. He was riding alongside me. He was everywhere. A strangled noise escaped my throat. I slammed my hand against the yellow bell strip on the wall. The bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror as the stop requested sign lit up. At the next corner, the bus hissed to a halt. The doors opened. I scrambled out, nearly falling onto the sidewalk. I didn't wait for the doors to close, I just ran. I ran without direction, my only goal to put distance between myself and that impossible image. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. I ducked into a narrow alleyway, hoping to lose myself in the city's labyrinthine guts. The alley was a dead end. A brick wall rose up in front of me, covered in graffiti. The only light was a single flickering bulb high above, casting a sickly orange glow on the damp pavement and overflowing dumpsters. I leaned against the wall, panting, my heart feeling like it was going to explode. I was trapped. I spun around, my back to the brick, and looked toward the mouth of the alley. A figure was standing there, blocking the only way out. He was just a silhouette against the brighter light of the street. He took a step into the alley, and then another. He was a homeless man, I realized. Dressed in layers of ragged clothing, his face obscured by a thick matted beard. He took another slow, shuffling step toward me. "Hey, buddy," he rasped, his voice rough. "Got any spare change?" My body was rigid with terror. I couldn't move. He came closer, his hand outstretched. I looked at his face, trying to see if he was a threat. And I saw his eyes. In the dark pools of his eyes, under the flickering orange light, he was there. The shadow. My other self. It looked back at me, its expression one of cold, clinical assessment. Then, the reflection did something new. It was not a nod. It was not a smile. The reflection of my other self, the violent man, raised its hand. It made a fist, and then slowly, deliberately, drew its thumb across its own throat. A clean, slicing motion. It was not a suggestion, it was a threat, a direct and unambiguous promise. A scream tore itself from my lungs, raw and animal. I lunged forward, not at the reflection, but at the man who carried it. I shoved him with all my strength, my hands connected with his chest. He was surprisingly frail. He let out a grunt of surprise and stumbled backward, his arms flailing. He tripped over his own feet and went down hard, his head hitting the grimy pavement with a sickening, wet thud. I didn't wait to see if he was okay. I didn't care. I bolted. I ran past his prone body, out of the alley and into the street. I didn't look back. I just ran, the sound of my own footfalls echoing in my ears. I ran all the way back to my building, up the 3 flights of stairs, my key fumbling in the lock. I slammed the door shut behind me, throwing the deadbolt. The click of the lock was a small, pathetic sound in the sudden silence of the apartment. I leaned against the door, my body shaking uncontrollably. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A violent, jarring vibration against my leg. I pulled it out with a trembling hand. The screen lit up. New message. The sender was listed only as unknown number. My thumb hovered over the notification. A part of my brain screamed not to open it. But I had to know. I tapped the screen. It was not a text, it was a picture. The image resolved, and the air left my lungs in a single, silent rush. It was a photograph, taken from a high angle looking down. It showed the alleyway, it showed the brick wall at the end, and it showed me, my back to the camera, staring at the empty space where the homeless man would soon appear. The photo had been taken just seconds before he entered the alley. The photo had been taken from behind me, while I was standing there, alone. The phone felt alien in my hand, a block of cold glass and metal. The screen was a black mirror. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't look away. The picture was still there, burned into my retinas. The image of the alley, the image of me, my back to the camera, the empty space, the photo taken from a place no one could have been. My mind refused to process it. It was a blank wall. The phone buzzed again, a frantic vibration against my palm, and I almost dropped it. The same unknown number. I couldn't breathe. My thumb moved on its own, a twitching nerve. I opened the new message. It was another picture. This one was close up, the face of the homeless man. His eyes were wide, staring at something just past the camera. His mouth was open in a silent, surprised "oh." His head was turned at an angle that wasn't right. A dark, wet patch was spreading on the pavement beneath his hair. The flickering orange light from the alley bulb gave his skin a waxy sheen. My stomach heaved. I stumbled into the bathroom, dropping the phone on the floor, and retched into the toilet bowl. Nothing came up but sour acid that burned my throat. I knelt there, my forehead pressed against the cool porcelain, shaking. The bathroom door was still closed. I had left the hammer on the floor. I had left him behind the shattered glass. But he wasn't in there anymore. He was out. He was in my phone. He was in the alley. There was a name that surfaced from the wreckage of my thoughts. A lifeline. Dr. Miller. My therapist from the inside. The man who had listened to my stories for 3 years. Who had sifted through the filth of my past and told me there was a man underneath it all worth saving. He had given me his personal number when I was released. For emergencies, John. Only for emergencies. This felt like one. My hands trembled so badly I could barely unlock the phone, its screen still showing the dead man's face. I swiped it away, my finger leaving a greasy smear. I found his contact. My first instinct was to call, but I couldn't trust my voice. I hit the video button instead. I needed to see a friendly face. I needed to see proof of a world that was still sane. It rang once. Twice. My heart hammered against my ribs with each electronic pulse. Then it connected. Dr. Miller's face materialized on the screen. A little pixelated at first before sharpening. He was in his study, the one I remembered from our final sessions before my parole. Bookshelves lined the wall behind him. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. His hair was grayer at the temples. He wore a sensible brown cardigan. "John?" he said, his brow furrowing in concern. The speakers on the phone were small, his voice tinny. "It's past midnight on my end. Is everything all right?" "No," I managed to say. The word felt like it was scraped from the bottom of my lungs. "Nothing is all right." I started to talk. The words came out in a torrent, a chaotic flood of images and fear. I told him about the apartment, the mirror, the man inside it who wore my face. I told him about the church, the nun, the reflection in her eyes. I told him about the bus and the alley and the homeless man. I told him about the photographs. I knew how it sounded. I could hear the rambling edge in my own voice, the words of a man coming apart. "I'm not crazy," I said, the phrase a pathetic defense. "I swear to God, Dr. Miller, I am not crazy." He listened. He didn't interrupt. He just sat there, his face a mask of careful, professional empathy. As I spoke, I watched the little window on the screen that showed my own face. A pale, sweating man with wild eyes. Then the image flickered. For a split second, the video feed from my camera froze. It froze on my face, but my expression had changed. My mouth was stretched into a wide, predatory grin. My eyes were cold and hard. It was him, the man from the mirror. It was there on the screen for a full 2 seconds, a digital ghost, before the feed stuttered and returned to my own terrified face. "My connection. It's bad," I stammered, my blood turning to ice. Dr. Miller didn't seem to have noticed. Or if he did, he didn't show it. "John, listen to me," he said, his voice calm and steady. It was the voice he used in therapy, the one that could talk you down from a ledge. "What you're describing, these visual and auditory hallucinations, they are consistent with a severe relapse of post-traumatic stress. The guilt you carry is a heavy burden. Sometimes, the mind creates a personification of that guilt. An entity. A monster. Something it can fight, because it's easier to fight a monster than it is to fight yourself." "It's not in my mind," I insisted, my voice cracking. "It's real. It touched the nun. It killed that man." "I understand," Dr. Miller said, the words placating, gentle. "The mind can be a powerful and convincing liar. The ghost of the past is a hard thing to exorcise, John. It clings to you." As he spoke those words, my eyes drifted from his face to the bookshelf behind him. There was a small, silver object on the shelf, just over his right shoulder. A paperweight, perhaps, or some abstract decorative piece. It was polished, curved, and it caught the light from his desk lamp. It reflected a distorted, warped version of his study. And in that sliver of reflected silver, something moved. A dark shape detached itself from the shadows behind the doctor's chair. It was tall and thin. It was my shape. The reflection wore my clothes. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace that I did not possess. It glided forward until it was standing directly behind Dr. Miller's chair. It leaned down. The reflection placed a hand on the doctor's shoulder. A familiar, proprietary gesture. I stopped breathing. My vision narrowed until the only thing in the world was that little silver object, and the impossible scene playing out within it. Dr. Miller was still talking, his voice a drone in my ears. "We can find you a new therapist locally, someone we can loop in on your case files. The important thing is not to isolate yourself." Then his voice changed. The shift was so sudden, so complete, it was like a switch had been flipped. The warmth vanished. The professional concern evaporated. His tone became flat, cold, and laced with a contempt that made the hair on my arms stand up. "John," he said. His eyes, looking at me through the phone, were no longer the eyes of a therapist. They were hard. "Did you think you could run?" I couldn't speak. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. "Did you think putting on a new set of clothes and moving to a new city would change anything?" He continued, his lips barely moving. The voice was his, but the words were not. They were the words of the man in the mirror. They were the words of my darkest thoughts given sound. "Did you think you were different now?" "Dr. Miller, what are you?" My voice was a choked whisper. He smiled. It was not Dr. Miller's smile. It was a thin, cruel slash across his face. It was the same grin I had seen on my own frozen image just moments before. "I see you," he said, the voice a low rasp. "I'm always here, right here." He lifted his hand slowly and tapped his index finger against his own temple. Once. Twice. "In here." A scream, high and animal, tore out of me. I didn't think. I reacted. I launched myself backward, away from the phone, and slammed the laptop shut with a violent crack of plastic. The connection was severed. The face was gone. But the voice lingered in the room. I scrambled into the corner of the small living room, curling into a ball, my arms wrapped around my head as if I could physically block out the world. The floorboards were cold against my cheek. I squeezed my eyes shut. It wasn't real. Miller was compromised. He was getting to him. He was getting to everyone. He's not in the mirror anymore. He's outside. The silence in the apartment was deafening. I stayed there, crouched in the corner, for a minute. 10 minutes. I don't know. Time had ceased to mean anything. Then I heard it. A sound from the hallway outside my door. Knock. 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 3 distinct, solid raps on the wood. My entire body went rigid. "John?" A voice called from the other side. It was muffled by the door, but it was unmistakable. It was Dr. Miller's voice. His real voice, laced with genuine worry. "John, it's me, Dr. Miller." The call cut out. "I was worried, so I came to check on you. I have a colleague who lives a few blocks over. He gave me a ride." "John, are you there? Please open the door." My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and terror. It couldn't be him. He was in his study, miles away. He was controlled, possessed. But the voice sounded so normal, so real. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I truly losing my mind? Had the stress finally broken me? Goulet. I pushed myself off the floor, my legs shaking. I crept toward the door like an animal stalking prey, my feet silent on the cheap carpet. My hand, slick with sweat, reached for the peephole. I slid the metal cover aside. The soft scrape of it sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I pressed my eye to the lens. The hallway was warped, the walls curving away. In the center of the image, under the dim, buzzing fluorescent light, stood Dr. Miller. It was him. He wore the same brown cardigan. His face was etched with concern. He glanced up and down the hallway, then back at my door. He looked exactly like a worried old man who had driven across town in the middle of the night to check on a disturbed former patient. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man. A wave of shame washed over me. I had screamed at him. I had treated him like a villain. He was the only person trying to help me, and I was losing it. I had to let him in. I had to explain. My hand went to the deadbolt. My fingers brushed against the cold metal turnlock, but I stopped. The reflection. The hand on his shoulder and the silver paperweight. The smile. The voice. In here. My gut screamed at me. A primal instinct, deeper than logic, deeper than shame. It was a single, powerful command. Do not open this door. I snatched my hand back as if the lock were red hot. I flattened myself against the wall beside the door, my heart pounding in my throat. I listened. He knocked again, a little more insistent this time. "John, I know you're in there. I'm not leaving until I know you're safe." I took a ragged breath. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice raw and loud against the wood. "Leave me alone! Go away!" Silence. I held my breath, listening. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, I heard it. The soft scuff of leather shoes turning on the linoleum. The sound of footsteps, slow and measured, walking away down the hall. They grew fainter and fainter, until I couldn't hear them anymore. He was gone. A shudder of relief went through me, so powerful my knees almost buckled. I sagged against the wall, sliding down to the floor. I buried my face in my hands. The right choice. I had made the right choice. I was safe. My phone, lying on the floor across the room, lit up. A soft ping echoed in the quiet. A new message notification. I crawled across the floor, my body heavy, exhausted. I picked up the phone. The message was from Dr. Miller. From his number. My thumb, trembling, tapped the screen. The message was short. Just a single sentence. "You made the wrong choice, John. Next time, I won't knock." I didn't scream. The sound from the phone was a final, clipped command, and executioner's verdict. There was no room for noise, only for the cold certainty that coiled in my gut. He wasn't in his study. He wasn't miles away. The voice on the phone was a lie, and the knocking at the door had been the truth. He was here. Movement became a series of jerky, disconnected actions. The bag, my old army surplus duffel, stuffed in the bottom of the closet. I dragged it out. Clothes. I grabbed handfuls from the single drawer, not looking, just stuffing them in. A shirt, socks, another shirt. The bag was a maw, and I fed it. Keys. Wallet. I checked the wallet. $67. Not enough. The ATM was 3 blocks away. Every shadow was a waiting shape. Every distant car backfire was a gunshot. I kept my head down, my shoulders hunched, a man trying to make himself smaller than the world. The machine hummed under my hand. I jammed the card in. Maximum withdrawal, $300. The machine whirred and spat out crisp 20s. They felt like fake paper in my slick, damp hand. I walked, not back toward the apartment, but away. Away from the building, from that door, from the man who was meant to help me. The phone was in my pocket, a block of heat against my thigh. It was a tracker, a leash. He had found me through it. The call, the location data. I had to get rid of it. I saw a city trash can on a corner, its mouth overflowing with paper cups and fast food wrappers. I pulled the phone out. Its screen was dark, a perfect black rectangle. It was in there. It was everywhere. My hand tightened around it, my thumb ground into the glass. I needed to break it. I needed to see it shatter. I lifted it high and brought it down against the concrete lip of the trash can. The first strike just made a dull thud. Nothing. My teeth ground together. Anger, hot and clean, surged through me. I slammed it again. A crack appeared, a good white spiderweb across the black surface. Again. A piece of glass flaked off. Again. And again. I smashed it until the plastic case was splintered, and the screen was a mosaic of broken shards. I panted, my knuckles raw, my arm aching. I ached to just drop it, to let it fall into the filth and walk away. But I had to look. One last time. I tilted the ruined face of the phone toward a streetlight. In a triangular piece of glass, wedged between 2 cracks, I saw a reflection. A sliver of my own eye. My own cheek. But behind me, in the warped reality of the shard, the reflection of my own head moved. It wasn't my movement. I was holding perfectly still, breathing hard. The reflection tilted. It shook its head once, a slow, lazy motion. A gesture not of menace, but of deep, profound disappointment. As if I'd spoiled a good game. A noise came out of my throat. A dry, rasping sound. I dropped the phone. It clattered into the trash can, disappearing among the refuse. I turned and ran. I paid for the room in cash. A place on the other side of the river, where the buildings sagged and the streetlights were mostly broken. The clerk was a thin man with a smoker's cough who didn't look at my face, only at the 320s I slid under the thick glass. He slid a key back. Room 2B, no questions. My kind of place. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and damp carpet. A bed with a thin mattress. A wooden chair. A small, grimy window that looked out onto a brick wall less than 3 feet away. There were no pictures on the walls. There was no television. There was no mirror. I locked the door. I slid the chain across. I pushed the flimsy wooden chair under the knob. I could breathe. For the first time since the text message, I felt the knot in my chest loosen a fraction. He couldn't find me here. No phone, no name, just a ghost in a ghost's room. I lay on the bed fully clothed, my hands behind my head, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The city's sounds were a muffled drone outside. I didn't plan to sleep. I planned to wait for the sun. But the exhaustion was a heavy blanket, pulling me down. My eyelids grew heavy, the ceiling swirled, my thoughts unraveled. I must have drifted off. I don't know for how long. An hour. Maybe 2. What woke me was the sound. It was faint. So faint I thought at first it was part of a dream. A dry, scraping noise. Like a twig being dragged across stone. It came from the window. S-C-R-R-R. Scrape, I sat up. My body was instantly rigid. My heart, which had been beating slow and heavy, began to hammer against my ribs. I did not move. I listened. The room was dark. The only light was a faint orange glow that filtered through the grimy pane from some distant street lamp. SCRRR. AAA. AAPE. It was the sound of a fingernail. A single finger, drawing a line on the outside of the glass. Slow. Deliberate. My gaze was locked on the window. I could see nothing but the dark rectangle and the texture of the brick wall beyond. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I held my breath, straining to hear. Footsteps. A cough. Anything. There was nothing. Just the low hum of the city. He couldn't be out there. It was the second floor. There was no fire escape. Just a sheer brick wall. It was impossible. My mind raced. A bird? A branch from a tree I couldn't see? A piece of loose gutter scraping in the wind? I had to know. I slid off the bed, my feet making no sound on the thin carpet. I moved toward the window, one slow step at a time, like a man approaching a wild animal. The air grew colder as I got closer. I reached the window. I could feel a draft coming through the frame. I leaned forward, my forehead almost touching the cool, dirty glass. I peered out into the sliver of space between the window and the opposing wall. Darkness. Bricks. Nothing. My eyes adjusted. I looked down. The sill outside was thick with years of city dust. A gray, gritty layer. And in the dust, something had been written. A word. Traced with a fingertip. The lines were clean, cutting through the grime. The orange light caught the edges of the letters. Find. Just that. One word. It wasn't a question. It was an order. My blood went cold. I scrambled backward, stumbling over my own feet, and fell hard onto the floor. I crab walked away from the window until my back hit the opposite wall, and I sat there, shaking, my eyes fixed on that simple, impossible word hanging in the night. Daylight did not bring relief. It only made the fear sharper. The word was still there, a pale scar on the dusty glass. I had to get out. I left the key on the bed and walked out into the morning, into a city of strangers. I needed to blend in. To disappear. I found a diner, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a thick smell of grease in the air. I ordered coffee and toast I knew I couldn't eat. I needed the noise. The clatter of plates. The murmur of conversations. The illusion of safety in numbers. A small television was mounted in the corner, tuned to a local news channel. I ignored it. I nursed my coffee, my eyes scanning the street outside the large front window. Every man who walked by with my build, my hair color, made my stomach clench. And police are asking for the public's help, the news anchor's voice cut through the diner's haze. I looked up. On the screen was a picture of a man. A face I knew. The wide, surprised eyes. The mouth in a silent O. It was the homeless man. The photo was a decent one, maybe from a shelter ID. Authorities have yet to release the man's name, the anchor continued, her face serious, but confirm he has been reported missing. He was last seen 2 nights ago by residents near this alley in the city's warehouse district. The image on the screen changed. It was a live shot. A police car, its lights off, was parked at the mouth of an alley. Yellow tape was stretched across the entrance. It was the alley. The flickering orange light I remembered was gone, replaced by the flat gray light of day. But it was the same place. The same graffiti on the walls. The same dumpster. My heart stopped. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, clattering into its saucer. Coffee sloshed over the rim. Missing. Not killed. They hadn't found him. No, they haven't found him, I whispered to myself. The words tasted like ash. I knew where he was. He was in my phone. Or what was left of it. But the man on the screen? He was missing. Find. The word from the window screamed in my head. It wasn't about finding me. It was an order for me. Find him. A loose end. A piece of the game I had failed to clean up. I threw a $5 bill on the table and ran. I didn't know where I was going at first, but my feet did. My body knew. There was only one place to go. Back to the beginning. Back to the apartment. I had to face the mirror. I had to end it. I ran through the streets, pushing past people, ignoring the angry shouts. The city was a blur of concrete and glass. My lungs burned. A sharp pain stitched my side. I kept running. I saw the familiar brick of my building. I didn't slow down. I burst through the main door and took the stairs 2 at a time, my feet pounding a desperate rhythm. 3rd floor. Down the hall. The door to my apartment. 314. It was open. Just a crack. A sliver of darkness. He wanted me to come in. The chair I'd wedged under the knob was gone. The lock I'd turned was undone. I pushed the door. It swung inward with a low groan. The apartment was dark. The curtains were drawn. It was cooler inside, the air still and heavy. I stepped in, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I let the door swing shut behind me, the click of the latch echoing in the small space. I stood there for a long moment, listening. Nothing. My feet moved on their own, carrying me across the living room, toward the short hallway, toward the bathroom. The door was open. Inside was a deeper darkness, an absolute pitch black that seemed to absorb the faint light from the rest of the apartment. That was where it lived. That was its heart. I stepped into the bathroom. The air was cold, smelling of porcelain and something else. Something metallic. Coppery. I reached out, my hand fumbling along the wall for the light switch. I found it. I hesitated. My fingers trembled over the plastic. Then, I flipped it. Nothing happened. The bulb was out. Or he had unscrewed it. I was standing in front of the sink. I could feel its ceramic edge against my legs. And in front of the sink was the mirror. A sheet of blackness. A pool of dark water standing on its end. I stared into it, my own silhouette, a faint outline against the deeper dark. I waited. Slowly, like oil seeping up from the depths, a shape began to form in the glass. It separated itself from the background. It was my shape. My height. My outline. But it was solid black. A hole cut in the world. It resolved, gaining detail. My face. My hair. My clothes. It was me. A perfect copy, looking back at me from the void. But something was wrong. His hands. They were hanging at his sides. And they were dark. Darker than the rest of him. Wet. They glistened in the non-light. He raised them slowly. He held them up for me to see, palms forward, as if presenting evidence. They were coated in something thick. It dripped from his fingertips. A single, dark drop fell from his right index finger, hitting the bottom of the mirror's frame with a silent splash. Blood. Fresh blood. He smiled. A slow, wide grin that pulled his lips back from his teeth. He looked pleased. Proud. He took his right hand, the one dripping with gore, and moved it toward the surface of the glass. He was going to touch it. He was going to touch me. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to scream. His bloody hand came closer, the fingers splayed. It pressed against the inside of the mirror. The glass did not stop it. His palm flattened against the surface, a perfect, wet, red handprint appearing on the glass. The exact same moment, his hand made contact, I felt it. A touch on my right cheek. It was cold. And wet. A sudden, shocking chill spreading across my skin. My own hand flew up, a spastic, uncontrolled jerk. My fingers pressed against my cheek. They came away slick. I brought my hand down, holding it in the faint light filtering from the hallway. My fingers were covered in a thick, red liquid. It was warm. It smelled of iron. It was blood. Real blood. My blood. Or someone else's. It was on my face. On my hands. The man in the mirror was still smiling, his bloody hand still pressed against the glass, a master admiring his work. He hadn't reached through. He didn't have to. The stain was already on me. It had always been on me. The floor was cold against my back. Cold and hard. The shock of it seemed to seep into my bones. A deep chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the tile. Time had come unstuck. I didn't know how long I had been on the floor. Minutes? An hour? My head throbbed with a low, dull beat, a drum inside my skull. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. The movement was slow, my muscles stiff and unwilling. I was in the bathroom, leaning against the wall opposite the sink. The faint light from the hallway cut a pale yellow rectangle across the floor. I looked at my hand, the one that had been covered in wet, warm red. It was clean, pale, trembling slightly. I raised it to my cheek, the place where I had felt the cold, wet touch. My skin was dry. There was nothing there. My eyes went to the mirror, a dark, flawless sheet of glass hanging above the sink. No bloody handprint, no smiling reflection, just a faint, ghostly image of my own shape in the dimness. It was as if nothing had happened. A hallucination. A flash of a nightmare while I was awake. But the memory of it was a physical thing. The feeling of the wetness. The iron smell. It was burned into my senses. It had been real. I had to get it down. I needed a record. Something outside of my own head. My body moved with a new sense of purpose. I stumbled out of the bathroom, into the living room, and grabbed my jacket. The keys to the apartment were in the pocket, next to my wallet. I didn't check the wallet. I just went. The corner store 2 blocks down was still open, its fluorescent lights a harsh beacon in the dark street. I bought a cheap spiral notebook and a black ballpoint pen, the kind that came in a pack of 10. The cashier, a tired-looking kid, didn't look at me twice. I was just another man buying cheap supplies in the middle of the night. Back in the apartment, I didn't turn on the main lights. I didn't want the brightness. I sat on the floor of the living room, my back against the couch, the open notebook on my knees. I clicked the pen. The sound was loud in the room. I started to write. I wrote about the phone, smashing it on the trash can. The reflection in the shard of glass. The motel room. The word find scraped into the dust on the outside of the window. I described running back here, the pounding of my feet on the pavement, the burning in my lungs. My hand shook as I wrote, the letters small and shaky. They barely held their shape. Then I wrote about the bathroom. The darkness, the shape forming in the mirror, the bloody hands, the touch on my cheek. I pushed the pen harder, trying to force the memory onto the page, to trap it in ink. My hand felt heavy. The pen became a lead weight. I watched my own fingers tighten their grip on the cheap plastic. The pen point dug into the soft paper, threatening to tear through. The flow of words stopped. My hand moved on its own. A new sentence formed, the letters different. They were sharp, angry slashes, hard and angular. Not my writing. I stared at the line. My mind refused to accept what I was seeing. I hadn't thought those words. I hadn't willed my hand to write them. But there they were. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again. I read what I had put on the page. My own frantic scrawled account was there, a desperate testament to fear. Felt it on my face, cold and wet. But in between my own lines, other words had appeared. They were jammed into the margins, scrawled over my own sentences. A violent intrusion. The sharp, angry script. You are weak. I ran my finger over the words. The ink wasn't different. It was the same pen. I turned the page. More of my writing. And more of the other. My writing. It's in the mirror. It's not me. The other, carved into the space below. This is my body. Another line of mine. The homeless man. He was just missing. The other's response, so hard it left an impression on the next page. He deserved it. My breath hitched. I dropped the notebook as if it had burned my hands. It fell open on the floor, the pages fluttering. It was not a record. It was a conversation. A conversation with something inside my own skin. I scrambled backward, away from the book, my palms flat against the dirty floorboards. I was not alone in my own head. I don't remember closing my eyes. I don't remember anything after seeing those words. There is a gap. A black hole in time. One moment I am on the living room floor, staring at the notebook. The next, I am standing. I am in the middle of the same room, but everything has changed. Darkness presses in at the windows. Night has fallen completely. Hours have passed. Gone. Simply erased. My body feels heavy, used. My neck is stiff. I look down at my hands. They are my hands. But they are not right. Dark, rich soil is packed under my fingernails. A long, thin scratch, red and angry, runs across the back of my left hand. I don't remember getting it. A smell hangs in the air. It's not the old dust and stale air of the apartment. It's new. It is perfume. A cheap, sweet smell, like flowers that are a day away from turning brown. It's a woman's scent. My stomach turned. I had never brought a woman here. I had never brought anyone here. Panic, cold and sharp, jabbed at my ribs. I stumbled toward my jacket, still crumpled on the floor where I'd left it. I grabbed my wallet. I felt inside. Cash. My ID. And something else. A small, hard object. My fingers closed around it. I pulled it out. It was an earring. A cheap piece of metal shaped like a silver feather, with a fleck of fake turquoise at the top. It was cold in my palm. Alien. It did not belong to me. It did not belong in my life. Where did it come from? The question was a scream in my head. The time. The lost hours. The dirt under my nails. The scratch. The smell. The earring. They were pieces of a puzzle I couldn't see. Facts, without a story. I ran. I ran to the bathroom, my feet pounding on the floor, the sound echoing the frantic beat of my own heart. I didn't fumble for the light. I didn't need it. I lunged to the sink, braced my hands on the cool ceramic edge, and looked up. He was there. The reflection in the mirror was me, but it was not me. He stood straight, confident. There was no fear in his eyes, only a cold, smug satisfaction. A faint smile played on his lips. He saw my panic, and he enjoyed it. He was watching a good show. He raised his right hand slowly. My own right hand remained clamped to the edge of the sink. In the mirror, his hand came up, palm facing me. On his ring finger was a simple silver band. A man's ring. I do not own a ring. I have never worn a ring. The man in the mirror, the man with my face, pointed. Not at me. He pointed past his own shoulder, out toward the living room. He pointed at the notebook, still lying open on the floor. His smiling eyes locked with my terrified ones. Look, they said. I turned, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I walked back into the living room like a man wading through deep water. I knelt. My hands trembled as I reached for the notebook. I picked it up. My eyes fell on the last page I had written on. There was a new entry. It was not my handwriting. It was the sharp, angry script. 4 words and an address. She liked my gift. Below it, a street name and an apartment number I had never seen before. 2415 North Harlow, Apartment 6. A sound ripped the world apart. The sound of splintering wood. The front door of my apartment flew inward, torn from its frame and slammed against the wall. Men shouted. Loud, guttural commands that overlapped into a single roar of noise. Police! Get on the fucking ground, now! Bright lights strobed, blinding me, pinning me in place. Shapes moved in the darkness. Big shapes, wearing dark vests. I saw the glint of a gun barrel. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was still on my knees, the notebook in my hand. A heavy body slammed into me from the side, driving the air from my lungs. My face hit the floorboards. The taste of dust and splintered wood filled my mouth. A knee pressed hard into my back. My arms were wrenched behind me. Cold metal clicked around my wrists. The cuffs bit deep into the skin. Clear! Someone shouted. Living room clear! They hauled me to my feet. My legs were weak. I stumbled, held up only by the hard grip on my arm. The strobing lights were from flashlights mounted on their rifles. They swept across the room, cutting through the darkness. One of the beams landed on the notebook, which had fallen from my grasp. A uniformed officer bent down and picked it up carefully by its edges. He flipped through the pages with his thumb. "Got something here, Sarge," he said. He didn't look at me. His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Looks like a journal. Found at the scene." He spoke into the radio on his shoulder. "Looks like a confession." Confession. Scene. The words didn't connect, they were just sounds. My head was ringing. They were dragging me toward the ruined doorway, out into the brightly lit hall. I saw the faces of my neighbors, peeking out of their apartments. Fearful. Curious. They were all staring at a killer. The officer's words echoed in my skull. Found at the scene. What scene? The chair was hard plastic. The cuffs were cold steel cutting into my wrists. One of the officers had cinched them too tight when he'd thrown me in the back of the car. I could feel my pulse throbbing against the metal. The room was a small, gray box. Gray walls, gray floor, gray metal table bolted to the concrete. A single fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting a sick, yellow-white glare on everything. It made the scuffs on the table look like old wounds. The air smelled of stale coffee and something sour, like old sweat. Across the table, two men sat watching me. One was old, heavy-set, with a face like a worn-out leather glove. His suit was rumpled. He hadn't said a word in 10 minutes. He just watched me, his eyes small and flat. The other was younger, with a neat haircut and a clean shirt. He was the one who asked the questions, his voice a low, even drone. I had tried to tell them. The words came out in a rush, a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. I told them about the apartment, about the things I bought to make it a home. I told them about the mirror. My voice sounded thin in the dead air of the room. It wasn't me. It was in the glass, a shape. It looked like me, but it wasn't. It moved when I didn't. It put things in my apartment. It wrote in my book. I looked from one man to the other. Nothing. The younger one made a note on a yellow legal pad. The older one's expression didn't change. "It touched my face," I said, the memory making my skin crawl. Its hand was covered in blood, but when I looked, my own hands were clean. The older detective finally moved. He shifted his weight in the chair, a soft grunt escaping his lips. He picked up a styrofoam cup, looked inside it, then put it down with a sigh of disgust. He turned his flat gaze to his partner. "Another one with the devil made me do it story," he said, not even looking at me. His voice was gravelly, thick with boredom. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a dismissal of everything I was. Hope, what little I had, shriveled and died in my chest. They weren't listening. They were processing me. I was a file to be closed, a piece of paperwork to be finished. "I know how it sounds," I pleaded, leaning forward as far as the cuffs would allow. The chain between them rattled against the underside of the table. But it was real. I was losing time. Blackouts. I'd wake up and things had happened. The younger detective, the one who had seemed to be listening, put his pen down. He looked at me, a flicker of something in his eyes. Pity? Professional courtesy? I couldn't tell. He slid a thick manila folder from the small stack beside him. The sound of it scraping across the metal table was loud. "We didn't find any haunted mirrors, John," he said, his voice still low and calm. It was the kind of voice you use on a spooked animal before you put it down. "But we did find this." He opened the folder. He didn't push it toward me at first. He just looked at the contents himself, his jaw tightening slightly. Then he turned it around and slid it across the last few inches of table separating us. Inside were photographs. Glossy, full-color police photographs. The first one was of a door. Apartment 6. The number was painted in flaking gold leaf. The door was splintered around the lock, just like mine. The next picture was inside. A living room. A cheap couch. A small television. A woman was on the floor. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. Her hair was spread out around her head like a dark halo on the beige carpet. There was a lot of red. So much red. It was soaked into her clothes, into the carpet, smeared on the wall beside her. My stomach twisted. A hot, acidic wave rose in my throat. I couldn't breathe. He used his pen to flip to the next photo. A close-up. Her face. Her eyes were wide with a surprise that would never fade. On her left earlobe there was nothing, just a small hole and a smear of dried blood. On the table next to her body, among a mess of magazines and a half-empty glass, was a single earring. A cheap piece of metal shaped like a silver feather, with a fleck of fake turquoise at the top. The world tilted. The humming of the light grew louder, filling my head. The earring from my wallet. The perfume in my apartment. The dirt under my nails. 2415 North Harlow, apartment 6, the address in my notebook. The pieces slammed together in my mind, forming a picture so monstrous I couldn't look at it. "No," I whispered. My own voice was a stranger's. "No, no, no." I pushed away from the table, my chair scraping violently against the floor. The cuffs bit deep, holding me captive. "That wasn't me." The words ripped out of my throat, raw and loud. "It was him, the thing in the mirror. He did it. He put the earring in my wallet. He wrote in the book." I slammed my cuffed hands down on the metal table. The sound was a flat, ugly crack of thunder in the small room. Pain flared in my wrists, but I didn't care. It was him. The old detective stood up. He moved with a slow, heavy deliberation. He didn't look at me. He walked past the table, his shoes making soft, scuffing sounds on the linoleum. He stopped in front of the wall to my left, the wall that was a single, large pane of dark glass from floor to ceiling, a one-way mirror. I'd known it was there the whole time. "You want to see him, John?" he asked, his back still to me. His voice was quiet now, laced with a tired, cruel sort of curiosity. "I'll show him to you." He lifted a hand and tapped his knuckle twice against the glass. The sound was sharp. Tap, tap. He gave a slight nod to the dark reflection. On the other side of the glass, a light flickered on. The darkness dissolved. It wasn't a mirror anymore. It was a window. An observation room. Standing there holding a clipboard and looking back at me with a grave, weary expression was a man in a tweed jacket, a man I knew. Dr. Miller, my court-appointed therapist from before, from years ago. A buzzing started in my ears, drowning out the hum of the light. He shouldn't be here. This was a police station. This was about a murder. What was he doing here? "Hello, John." Dr. Miller's voice came through a small speaker mounted on the wall. It was tinny, distorted. "We've talked about this, you and I, many times. There is no shadow, there is no one in the mirror." My mouth was dry. I couldn't form a reply. Dr. Miller said something to someone I couldn't see. He handed a small, dark object to the older detective, who had walked over to a television set on a rolling metal cart in the corner of the room. A VCR was bolted to the shelf below it. The detective shoved the object, a videotape, into the slot. He pressed a button. The television screen flickered to life. It buzzed, then settled on a grainy black and white image. A timestamp in the bottom corner showed a date from last night. The image was of a hallway, an apartment building hallway. I recognized the cheap, patterned carpet from the photograph. The picture was still, empty. I watched, my heart hammering against my ribs. A door opened. Apartment 6. A figure stepped out. It was me. I watched myself step out of the dead woman's apartment. But the man on the screen was not the man cuffed to a chair in this room. There was no fear on his face, no confusion. He moved with a liquid confidence I had never possessed. He pulled the door shut behind him, the click inaudible on the silent tape. He straightened the collar of his jacket. His face was calm, cold. The set of his jaw was hard. It was the face I had seen in the mirror, the face of the man wearing the ring. He took a few steps down the hall, directly toward the hidden security camera, and for a second his eyes seemed to look right at me, through the screen, through the years. Then he pursed his lips and began to whistle, a jaunty, careless tune I couldn't hear but could see in the movement of his cheeks. He walked out of the frame. The screen showed an empty hallway for 5 long seconds, then went to static. The detective hit the stop button. The machine whirred and spat out the tape. The room was silent again, but the silence was different now. It was heavy, crushing. Every theory, every desperate hope I had clung to, the ghost, the entity, the curse, it all evaporated. There was no supernatural force at play. There was only the videotape. There was only the man on the screen. There was only me. My body went limp. The fight drained out of me, leaving nothing behind. I stared at the blank television. The image of that whistling man burned onto the back of my eyes. The truth was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, on my skull. It wasn't a thing in the mirror trying to get out. It was a thing inside me that was already out. It had been out for a long time. The man who sat here, terrified and crying, was the shadow. I was the ghost. He was the one who was real. Slowly I lifted my head. I looked at the window. at the dark glass that had become a mirror again now that the light on the other side was off. I saw my reflection. A man broken, cheeks wet with tears, eyes wide with a pain so complete it had no sound. My face was a mask of pure, abject horror. But as I watched, something happened. The reflection's mouth, my mouth, did not tremble. The reflection's eyes, my eyes, did not hold my despair. Very slowly, with an almost imperceptible smoothness, the corners of my reflection's lips began to curve upward. The change was subtle at first, then more defined. It was not a smile of happiness, it was a sneer. A cold, contemptuous curl of the lips that dripped with mockery and triumph. It was the smile of the man on the videotape. It was the smile of a killer. It was the smile of the winner, looking out from inside my own face, enjoying the show. The walls were soft. That was the first thing. Not soft like a pillow, but a dense, yielding give. A dead feeling. I pushed my fingers into the quilted white fabric. It sucked the warmth from my hand. The floor was the same. The whole world was a small, white, padded box. There was no window, no chair, no table, no mirror. Just the four soft walls, the soft floor, and a heavy door with a small rectangular slot near the bottom. Above me, a flat, caged light fixture cast a constant, shadowless glare. The light hummed. It was the only sound. A low, electric thrum that vibrated in my teeth. They had stripped me, my clothes, my shoes, my identity. I was in a one-piece jumpsuit, made of a rough, stiff canvas. It had no pockets. The back was sealed with something I couldn't reach. I sat in a corner, knees pulled to my chest, my arms wrapped around them. I tried to make myself small. The white fabric of the walls felt like it was expanding, pushing in on me. I tried to focus on the hum of the light. A single, steady thing in a world that had fractured into a million sharp pieces. The reflection in the dark glass. The triumphant sneer. My face. Not my face. I rocked back and forth, a slow, useless motion. The memory was a hot needle in my brain. The man on the videotape. The whistling. He was so confident. So calm. He walked out of that woman's apartment and left her dead on the floor. No, not me. I was Dace. I was the one who bought the cheap furniture. The one who tried to sweep the floors. The one who felt the guilt, the heavy weight of the past. That was me, John. The man on the tape was him. The man from the mirror. But there was no mirror now. Only the soft walls that absorbed every sound, every scream. A new sensation started in my hands. An itch. Not on the skin, but deep in the muscle and bone of my knuckles. A restless energy. A command. The backs of my hands wanted to meet the wall. Hard. To feel the impact. The give of the padding. The jarring shock up my arms. It was not my thought. It was an impulse. Alien and strong. A sudden thirst for impact. I curled my fingers into tight fists, my nails digging into my palms. The small pain was a distraction. It was mine. I controlled it. I focused on the crescent-shaped dents in my skin. Stay here. Stay in this body. The heavy door made a noise. A loud, metallic clank as a bolt was drawn back. The sound was a hammer blow in the humming silence. The door swung inward. Dr. Miller stood in the doorway. He wore the same tweed jacket. He looked older than he had behind the glass. More tired. He held a simple wooden stool in one hand. He didn't look at me at first, just surveyed the small room. He stepped inside, placed the stool in the center of the floor, and let the door swing shut behind him. Another heavy clank as it locked. We were alone. He sat on the stool, his hands clasped between his knees. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Not pity. Not anger, something clinically distant. "Hello, John," he said. His voice was quieter without the tinny speaker. Calmer. It was the calm of a man disarming a bomb. I didn't answer. I just stared at him from my corner, my knuckles white. He waited. The hum of the light filled the space between us. "The apartment," he said finally. "The mirror. We've talked about these things before. Years ago. You told me you felt like someone was watching you. That you didn't recognize yourself sometimes." My throat was dry. A desert. "He's real," I whispered. The words felt like sand. I saw him. You all saw him. On the tape. We saw you, John. Dr. Miller corrected gently. He leaned forward slightly. We've been through your records. All the old therapy sessions. All the blackout periods you reported. The memory gaps. The objects you'd find and not remember buying. It's a pattern. A very old one. He paused, his gaze steady. There is no he. There is only you. You, and the person you created to carry the things you couldn't. I shook my head. A small, violent jerk. No. I'm John. I was in prison. I did my time. Yes. You were. Dr. Miller agreed. And that's when John became the dominant personality. The one who felt remorse. The one who wanted to be good. A shield. The person you're speaking to me as, right now. He is a construction. A very convincing one. He was built to cope with the guilt. He took a breath. But he is not the original. He is not the one who owns the house. A spike of pain drove itself into the base of my skull. A sharp, hot pressure that made my vision blur at the edges. What are you talking about? The words were a low moan. I'm talking about the man on the tape, Miller said, his voice unwavering. The one who whistles. The one who isn't afraid. That's the core. The first one. The personality you call him has a name. Dr. Miller looked directly into my eyes. He held my gaze and spoke a single word. A name I had never heard but instantly recognized with a terror that went beyond bone, beyond blood. His name is Cole. The name hit me like a physical blow. The spike of pain behind my eyes exploded. It was no longer a spike. It was a white-hot sun, burning away thought, burning away memory. The hum of the light became a roar. The white walls seemed to pulse, to breathe. A wave of nausea churned in my stomach. The itch in my knuckles became a fire, a screaming command to strike. No, I gasped, pressing the heels of my hands into my eye sockets. No, my name is John. I'm John. I tried to be good. I just wanted a new life. The words were a desperate prayer, a flimsy shield against the coming flood. I was losing purchase. The floor felt like it was tilting beneath me. John is just a mask. Dr. Miller's voice cut through the noise, relentless and sharp. You built him after the first crime. Not to atone, to hide, a place to put the guilt so the rest of you could function. But the structure is failing. John is getting weaker. The blackouts are getting longer. The things he does, the things Cole does, are getting worse. He's taking over. He's always been stronger. A new voice, not mine, not Dr. Miller's, screamed inside my head. It was not a thought. It was a soundless roar of pure will. Shut up! My whole body convulsed. A single, violent tremor. I fell from my sitting position onto my side, my head thudding against the soft wall. The pain in my skull was blinding. And then they came. Memories. Not mine. Fragments of someone else's life, playing out behind my eyes. The sharp metallic scent of blood in a parking garage. The weight of a tire iron in my hand, heavier than I remembered ever holding. The face of a man, eyes wide with pleading, just before the first swing. The crunch. The splintering of bone. The feel of silk. A woman's blouse. Her scream cut short by a hand over her mouth. Her perfume gardenias, thick and sweet. It wasn't the woman from apartment 6. It was someone else. Another one. The cold thrill of it. The power. The sense of absolute control. These feelings were not mine. My feelings were fear, shame, and a constant, gnawing regret. This was different. This was dominance. This was pleasure. I was drowning. My consciousness, the scared, remorseful part of me that called itself John, was a small boat in a hurricane. I was sinking. The memories were the waves, crashing over me, filling me, replacing me. I looked at Dr. Miller through a haze of tears and agony. My vision was swimming. He was a blurry shape in a tweed jacket. Help. The word was a bare puff of air, a bubble rising from a man going under. Help me. I pushed myself up, my arms trembling. I got to my knees. I looked at him, my last plea in my eyes. I was begging him to save me from myself. Then, something shifted. The trembling in my arms stopped. The blinding pain in my head receded, leaving behind a clear, ringing silence. The wave of nausea vanished. The fear that had been my constant companion for years, the very foundation of my being, simply evaporated. It was gone. In its place, a cold stillness spread through my limbs. A strength I had forgotten I possessed flowed back into me. My posture straightened. The desperate slump was gone, replaced by a straight-backed confidence. I lifted my head. The world was sharp again. The color of Dr. Miller's jacket, the small frayed thread on his collar, the tired lines around his mouth. I saw it all with perfect clarity. I let my hands fall to my sides, loose and relaxed. A slow smile spread across my face. It was not John's frightened, watery grimace. It was the easy, contemptuous sneer of the man from the mirror, the man from the tape. I looked directly at Dr. Miller, and my voice, when it came out, was steady and smooth. A little deeper than John's, a little rougher around the edges. "Hello, Doctor. Been a while." Dr. Miller's shoulders sagged. A long, weary sigh escaped his lips. The look on his face wasn't surprise. It was defeat. A deep, profound sadness. He knew he had lost. The man he was trying to reach was gone, submerged beneath the cold surface. "He's gone, isn't he?" Dr. Miller asked, his voice low. It was a formality. He already knew the answer. I considered the question. I could still feel him, the other one. John. A faint, terrified flicker in a dark corner of my mind, like a dying ember. I could snuff it out whenever I wanted. I shrugged, a casual, fluid motion. The stiff jumpsuit felt strange, but the body was familiar. That whining kid? He was always weak, spent half his time staring into glass, crying about things that needed doing. I flexed my fingers, feeling the solid strength in them. The itch was gone. It had been satisfied. He was a good hiding place for a while. Let me rest. But a man can't live in the attic forever. I met the doctor's tired eyes, my smile widening. It's good to be back in my own house. Months passed. The white of the padded room gave way to the pale beige of the common area. The constant, shadowless glare was replaced by the softer, yellower light from barred windows that showed nothing but a high brick wall and a sliver of gray sky. Time moved differently here. It was measured in medication schedules and meal trays. I sat at a plastic table, a checkered board between me and another man. The chess piece, a black knight, was smooth and cool in my hand. It had a nice weight to it. Solid. I moved it to G4. A simple, effective move. A fork. My opponent, a man named Arthur, whose hands trembled constantly, stared at the board. His mouth hung slightly open. He didn't see the threat. He never did. He was thinking about his next move, but I was thinking 5 moves ahead. I was always thinking 5 moves ahead. The routine was a comfort. Chess at 10. Group therapy at 11:30. Lunch at 1. The structure was a useful cage, and I had learned to appear as just another docile animal within it. I kept my head down. I spoke when spoken to. I took my medication without complaint, letting the pill dissolve under my tongue before I swallowed the water. I performed my role. The repentant man, the broken man, the man trying to piece himself back together. It was a mask I wore with practiced ease. John's mask. It suited my purposes. A new sound cut through the low murmur of the room. A sharp clatter, followed by the hiss and rattle of dozens of small objects scattering across the linoleum floor. I looked up. A young nurse new to the ward stood frozen, an empty metal tray held in her hand. Her face was flushed. Tiny white, blue, and yellow pills lay strewn around her feet like fallen confetti. A few of the other patients laughed. A low, dumb sound. Arthur didn't even look up from the board. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the floor. I knelt beside her. "It's all right," I said. My voice was soft, reassuring, the voice they all knew. "Happens to everyone." Her hands were shaking as she tried to scoop the pills up. I started helping, my fingers methodically picking up one pill at a time. White, blue, yellow. I deposited them into the cup she held out. Our hands brushed. Hers was clammy. "Thank you," she whispered, not looking at me. "Thank you so much." "No trouble at all." When we had gathered them all, I stood and helped her to her feet. She finally looked at me, a grateful smile on her face. "Really? Thank you, Mr. Cole," I said, a name that still felt new on my tongue in this place. It was the name on my file. I smiled back. A simple, small smile. For a single second, her own smile faltered. I saw it. A flicker. A brief tightening at the corners of her mouth. Her eyes, wide and brown, changed. The gratitude was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp wariness. A primal recognition. It was the look a mouse gives just before it realizes the shadow overhead is not a cloud. She saw past the mask. She saw the thing wearing it. She pulled her hand back as if my touch had burned her. I have to go," she stammered, turning and walking away much too fast. I watched her go, the smile still fixed on my face. Interesting. I went back to my table. Arthur was still staring at the board, oblivious. I sat down and looked at my handiwork. "Check," I said softly. He flinched, as if waking from a dream. The therapy room was always cold. Dr. Miller sat in his usual chair. I sat in mine. We had done this twice a week for 6 months. He looked tired. The lines around his eyes were deeper. He thought he was making progress. He thought by putting a name to me he had somehow gained control. He had not. He had merely given me a key. "How have you been feeling, Cole?" he asked. I let out a long, slow breath. I slumped a little in my chair, letting my shoulders round. I made myself look smaller, weaker. "I keep thinking about him," I said. My voice was low. "John." Dr. Miller leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What do you think about?" "I miss him," I lied. The words tasted like ash, but I delivered them with perfect sincerity. He was the good part. The part that felt bad for what was done. He wanted to be better. I looked down at my hands, clasped in my lap. Without him, it's just quiet. This was the narrative he wanted. The struggle for redemption, the integration of the fractured self. I fed it to him in carefully measured doses. "That's a very positive sign, Cole," Miller said, his voice gentle. "Recognizing the value in that part of yourself is the first step. John wasn't a separate person. He was you. Your capacity for remorse, your conscience." I nodded slowly, as if digesting a profound truth. On the small table between us sat a metal cup of water. It was standard issue. Stainless steel, dented at the rim. I reached out and picked it up. My reflection was a warped, funhouse caricature in the curved metal. A long face. Dark, stretched eyes. "Sometimes," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "when I look at shiny things, I think I can still see him. Just for a second. In the reflection. He looks scared." I was using his own story. The story John wept and screamed about for years. The story of the haunted mirror. I was taking his ghost and turning it into my puppet. Dr. Miller was silent for a long moment. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was analyzing, categorizing. He saw this as a breakthrough, a symbolic manifestation of my internal conflict. He had no idea he was the one being analyzed. "What does he do?" Miller finally asked. "When you see him?" I stared at the distorted face in the cup. "He just looks at me," I said, "like he's begging for something. And I don't know what it is." I set the cup down. The session ended a few minutes later. I walked back to my room, the heavy footsteps of the orderly behind me. The bolt slid home with a solid chunk. The sound echoed inside me. Not in my ears. Deeper. The screaming began. It was silent. A soundless shriek that had no throat to tear, no lungs to empty. My hands, not my hands, unlaced the standard issue shoes and placed them neatly under the bed. My arms, not my arms, pulled the rough canvas jumpsuit over my head. My body, this stolen house of flesh and bone, moved with a fluid economy that was not mine. I was the ghost. I was the reflection in the cup. "No, no, please, no." The plea was a thought, a bubble of terror in a black ocean. It had no power. He, Cole, simply turned the volume down. I was in the dark, a prisoner behind my own eyes. I could see everything. I could hear everything. I was nailed to the back of my own skull, a spectator to my own life. I watched him move my hands. I listened to him use my voice. I felt the floor under my feet but could not command them to stop. I was there in the therapy session. I tried to scream when he spoke of me, when he twisted my pain into a tool for his own manipulation. I wanted to smash the metal cup, to tell Dr. Miller, "He's lying. He's playing you. I'm still here. Help me." But the words melted before they could form. My throat was not my own. My tongue was his. He built this prison for me. When he took over in that white room, he didn't kill me. He entombed me. My fear, my guilt, my desperate need to be good. He took it all and forged it into the walls of my cage. And he left me just enough awareness to watch. That was his true cruelty. He didn't just want the house. He wanted me to watch him live in it. I saw the new nurse. I saw the way he looked at her. It wasn't desire. It was appraisal. The way a butcher looks at a side of beef. I felt the smile spread across my face. A rictus of cold amusement that I was powerless to stop. I watched her recoil, and in her fear I felt a flicker of hope. She sees him. She sees the monster. But what could she do? He was the model patient. He was Cole, the man who was getting better. The screaming inside me became a low, constant moan, an endless river of despair. This was my existence now, the silent passenger, the ghost in the mirror. My body walked to the small, lidless toilet and steel sink that were bolted to the wall. He turned on the cold water, the sound loud in the small room. He braced my hands, his hands on either side of the basin, and leaned forward. He stared down into the polished steel. The surface was not a perfect mirror, but it was enough. It reflected the harsh overhead light, the beige walls, and a face. My face. But it was wrong. In the warped steel, my eyes were wide with a terror that was all mine. Tears I could not physically shed streamed from them. My mouth was open in that silent, circular scream. It was a perfect portrait of my trapped soul. John. Scared. Weak. Broken. I watched. From inside the prison, as the real face, the one looking down, began to change. The neutral mask he wore for the world dissolved. The muscles around the eyes relaxed into an expression of utter contempt. The lips, my lips, slowly, deliberately, pulled back from the teeth. It was not a smile of happiness. It was a baring of fangs, a claim of absolute ownership. He leaned closer to the weeping phantom in the steel. His breath fogged a small patch of the metal. He spoke, and the sound was not for the room but for me. A whisper that traveled from his throat directly into the core of my prison. "You're the ghost now, Johnny." His smile widened, a horrific, triumphant crescent. "And this house is mine.